What's up, everybody? It's JJ Buckets, and today is going to be a collaborative effort.
Hi, I'm Declan Collins. Nice to meet all you guys at home. Hope you enjoy.
And today we are going to talk about Dennis Schroder, we're going to talk about Scotty Barnes, and we're going to talk about the starting point guard position for the Toronto Raptors. Now, before we fully get into things, excuse me folks, usual drill, just make sure you're leaving a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, plus if you plan on doing any sports betting in the near future, just make sure to check out my link in the description below. The reason I feel like this conversation is becoming big right now is Dennis Schroder is obviously coming off a FIBA MVP with Germany, where they ended up winning the championship, and he ended up having a really good run, 19 points per game, 6 assists per game. He led the effort there by all means. Even though, Germany was a good team.
Germany had some good players on that team, but Dennis Schroder, he definitely carried a lot of the load.
Yeah, so let's talk about Dennis Schroder a little bit. Let's talk about the pros of why, there are some people talking like, yeah, hey, maybe Dennis Schroder should start for the Toronto Raptors. Maybe the Scottie experiment at point guard isn't, the way to go. So with Schroder, I think some of the big things with him are obviously going to be his leadership and his veteran presence, and I think you had a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I really like Dennis Schroder. He was one of my favorite players on Atlanta. He was the main point guard on a lot of those winning Atlanta teams after T, but he's been on a lot of good winning teams, not just in Atlanta, but in OKC as well, and even some of last year, he had some success on the Thunder. He's had success in many different spots, being the starting point guard, as well as coming off the bench, where he finished second in 6th Man of the Year voting in, I want to say, 2018. But this is the type of guy that can give you 5 assists a night on relatively low turnovers for being a primary ball handler. Another thing is, like you said, the veteran presence, it's there. He's going to be one of the older players on the Raptors as well. But he's a great scorer as well. He's definitely a very good scorer for being a point guard.
Yeah, and the Raptors have a lot of young guys, so you can definitely see the benefit of having somebody like a Dennis Schroder kind of guiding the way, for your Scotty Barnes. Even OG's been in the league for a while, but he's still a touch on the younger side, I would say. Obviously, Gary Trent Jr., you have Grady Dick, who's just going to be joining the league. So a lot can be said of having a proper leader out there. And again, we just saw what he did with Germany, so that leadership could go a long way for the team. But I also do feel like there's a lot of cons to potentially talk about with him. And some of them aren't even specifically directed at him, but just kind of the overall construction of the roster. The big one for me that jumps right off the page, and something I talk about on this channel all the time, but spacing, my God. So if in theory, right, we have our starting lineup as Dennis Schroder, it would be Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Jakob Poeltl. That is 4 below average 3-point shooters, and that's tough in modern day basketball.
Yeah, it's tough when at the same time Pascal's a good post player, but you've got Poeltl who's a little bit slow on his feet. So if there's no one to drag out players and they could just clog the paint, Poeltl will not be effective enough to be a starting big on a good team.
Yeah, who would, again, outside of OG Anunoby, who's a pretty good off the catch, threat. Who's really threatening you from the perimeter on that team? That lineup?
There's no one. Poeltl has no spacing. Pascal's an average for considerably a big, and then Scotty is he's a subpar 3-point shooter. So there's really no spacing on the floor when you've got that starting lineup out there.
Yeah, and guys' lives are going to be more difficult. Obviously, like you said, Poeltl kind of becomes less effective. Yeah. Pascal Siakam certainly is going to have a harder time driving into the paint. So will OG Anunoby. So will Scotty Barnes. Obviously, Dennis Schroder, somebody that likes to attack the basket a decent bit. So there's going to be a lot of entry points to the basket that are going to be clogged up just because of who's on the court together, and it'll be tough. I believe you want to talk about the defense of Dennis Schroder as well.
Yeah, the defense of Dennis Schroder, it's subpar. You'll never see him in there in the passing lane numbers or the steal numbers. He's a below average defender. And we have had that, Van Vliet was pretty much a below average defender. We never have had an above average or even a great defensive point guard. Lowry was pretty good, but other than that, we haven't really had anyone, and we're just moving right back to Dennis Schroder. So we're taking a step back, going from Lowry to Van Vliet to Schroder, and it's not going to fare well with the young Raptor squad.
Yeah, I do think there's things that Fred VanVleet was good on defensively. On the whole, I don't know if I'd call him below average.
Yeah, that's fair.
But like he was a step down from Kyle Lowry. I agree with you there, and then Dennis Schroder would be another step down.
Yeah, something for me is like there were, especially in the modern day NBA, with there's some taller guards. There was a mismatch with Fred VanVleet because he is a smaller guard.
That's fair.
That's something else. Like with contesting shots, it was harder for him to jump and get in the face of like someone like LaMelo Ball, who we face quite often in the year.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other big talking point with some of the cons of starting Dennis Schroder is just, again, it goes to the overall roster construction. This time, not focusing on the spacing, but if we're talking about the point guard rotation itself. If Schroder is your starting point guard, what are you kind of doing from there? Are you doing something similar to last season where you kind of roll Pascal and Scottie into that spot later? Or are you actually considering turning to Malachi Flynn, who, quite frankly, has given you no reason to have faith in him?
Yeah, I don't believe in Malachi Flynn. He's had a few years, and while he hasn't had a lot of minutes, in those minutes he hasn't really shined at all or showed any promise. So by starting Schroder, you're going to have Malachi Flynn be your backup guard, which would be a subpar guard in the entire league. He'd be like a bottom 5 backup guard in the entire league. So it's hard starting Schroder for one of those reasons.
Like, if I'm listening to that, like Dennis Schroder, Malachi Flynn as your combination at your point guard rotation, that respectfully sounds like one of the worst rotations in basketball.
It's not good. It's also small guard combo. Like I mentioned with the modern NBA, like there's taller guards. It's another small combo.
Let's look at the other side for it. So Scotty Barnes, if you're envisioning him as your starting point guard, there's a couple of things I like right off the bat. So we talked about the spacing thing beforehand. So I'm going to assume here that if Scotty is your starting point guard, Dennis Schroder is going to the bench, and then Gary Trent Jr. is probably slotting in at your 2. Obviously, OG at the 3, Pascal at the 4, Yak at the 5. And to me, that kind of already sounds like a lot smoother of a starting lineup.
Yeah, it does. And now another thing is like you get Grady Dick to be the primary shooter off the bench as well now. Mm-hmm. So he can grow as a shooter, getting more touches without Gary Trent taking those touches away from behind the arc. And now Grady Dick can potentially become your 2 guard in the future after Gary Trent ends up leaving. So
yeah, you think he's gonna leave?
I like Gary Trent a lot, but we'll see. We'll see what the future holds.
But in any case, for this upcoming season, again, personally speaking, I like that lineup a lot more. And in particular, let's be honest, there's a lot of potential for just this Raptors team to not be this good this season. So why not give Scotty Barnes a chance to experiment with his game, right?
Yeah, I agree. And another thing is, like, obviously we're probably not going to be good, and there might not be a change of success between the two of Dennis Schroder and Scotty Barnes. You may as well look forward to the future and give Scotty the opportunity to maybe be our franchise point guard, because we've never had a big point guard before. Like I keep mentioning, like we had Calderon and Lowry and VanVleet, now Schroder. Let's try something else though, because we've had the same build of point guard for so long, and while it has worked in the past, the NBA is evolving, and we need a defensive, playmaking-centric point guard, and I think maybe that's what Scotty Barnes can be.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously the jokes have been there for a while about, like, Vision 6'9". I think this would really be aligned perfectly with that, right?
It would align perfectly with that, and now that we've got a center in Pirtle, who's actually like 7 feet tall, like we've got a really long, lengthy lineup, and there's not going to be any mismatches at all, which I love.
Yeah, like there will be good switchability with this team and with that lineup in particular. And the one thing that I'm going to throw at you that I personally think about is, if you folks will recall, Giannis Antetokounmpo, early in his career, he got the chance to play point guard a little bit for that Milwaukee squad, and quite frankly, I think it did wonders for his handle, for the improvement of his overall game. And I think giving Scotty Barnes that chance, whether or not he's successful or not in that position, whether or not you want to stick with him as a quote-unquote de facto point guard moving forward, I think giving him that opportunity to have that ball in his hands as the lead playmaker can do wonders for his growth.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, another thing is, like, Scotty, he averaged 5 assists a game last year as a secondary ball handler. So while doing that, there's room to grow. He can get up to that 7.5 range, and that'd be perfect. That'd be right on par with what we've seen in the past from Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet. So you're not really taking a step down, and you're adding defense and playmaking. So I like it.
Cool. Now, as far as the, I guess, potential cons go, we've talked about obviously the secondary playmaker part for Scotty Barnes. So the questions then do become like, are you ready to give him the reins as the lead playmaker, or is there a little bit of hesitation there?
There's a little bit of hesitation, one, because he doesn't play the position. He's been a point forward in the past, but as a secondary ball handler, he did average 5 assists a game, but he also averaged 2 turnovers a game last year. And you can attribute to that being him being young, but 2 turnovers a game as a secondary ball handler, that's pretty tough. That can translate maybe into that 3 range. So you don't want that to happen. You want him to be safer with the ball and hopefully him grow as a playmaker.
Yeah. So like the one thing I would say is with Florida State, I would kind of say like, I would say he played point guard when he was at Florida State. But like you're right in terms of like at the NBA level, he's never actually done it. I think to an extent, you know, maybe the Raptors are still trying to figure out what Scotty's position is going to be in the NBA.
It's weird because he's very versatile, and it's almost like he's way too versatile because he'll probably never end up finding that one spot that defines him as a player because he's so versatile. He can play the 4, he can play shooting guard, and hopefully he can experiment with point guard.
Yeah, and with the Raptors, and I guess his previous runs with the turnovers and stuff like that, on the flip side of it, obviously, like, that was a Nick Nurse offense.
Yeah.
I think to an extent, you're expecting different stuff with Darko.
Yeah.
Like, I think, I've talked about it before, like, Darko's offense is a lot more about quick decision making, and I think that is potentially an area where Scotty thrives, quite frankly.
Yeah, it could be, but at the same time, with the quick decision making, him being so young, it could leave some doubt with passing the ball, getting the ball, think, then pass. It's like you're thinking very quick, and he might do blind passes and stuff like that. But hopefully, he can grow as a point guard. That's my thing. I'd like to see him grow.
Yeah. So I think overall, we've kind of touched upon the big things with Dennis Schroder and Scotty Barnes. I'm going to throw a quick opinion out there, personally speaking. As far as this conversation goes, I'm still in the camp that I think you run Scotty Barnes as your point guard at the beginning of next season. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to start with the experiment at Scotty at the point guard spot. And it's not just about Scotty being at the point guard spot. Like, Gary Trent spacing the floor, he'll be our only floor spacer at the shooting guard spot. And another thing is Dennis Schroder being a 6th man. He's had a lot of experience with being a 6th man in the past, and he's thrived. Him having his own unit on the secondary team, he can really do some damage there, and we might even be able to see a 6th man of the year candidate if all goes well.
Yeah. So I think that's the final verdict here is start Scotty, bring Schroder off the bench, but let us know what you folks think. Obviously, comment section is there for a reason, so drop whatever opinions you have in there. If you think we're dumb, tell us that. We can
Please roast me. I don't care. Do it.
We can take it for the most part within reason.
Within reason. Nothing too crazy.
Other than that, folks, usual drill at the end of this video is just make sure you're leaving a like on it. It really helps the algorithm out a ton, and it takes like a second. So like, hit that thing, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. And before I fully tap out, Devin, thanks for doing this. It's been a pleasure.
See you later. Thank you for having me on, guys.
All right, folks, that's been the video. We will see everybody next time.